name is Jennifer Roth, and I teach link programs for the Girl Scouts. Some of you may recognize me from my gingerbread, crochet, or jewelry classes. Today, I'd like to teach you about plein air watercolor. Plein air means open air in French, so that just means we'll be painting outside in this beautiful sunny spring weather. The supplies that you'll need are a painting board. Now, that could be a clipboard or a flat piece of cardboard. Some watercolor paper. If you don't have watercolor paper, any thick paper will work. A drawing paper or cardstock. You need a simple watercolor set with a palette for mixing. Most of them come with a paintbrush, but if it doesn't, then a small round brush is easiest for beginners. You'll also need a cup of water and some paper towels. Now it's time to paint. Let's go outside. Find a comfortable place to sit with a view that you'd like to paint. It could be a view of trees, of your house, of your neighbor's house. Just make sure that wherever you're sitting, that you have a nice view of what you want to paint. So let's get started painting. I like to start all my paintings with the sky, and I'm going to use a technique called wet on wet. So what that means is I take plain water and I wet my paper. This technique gives you smooth color with no brush marks. Now we have to work relatively quickly because we're outside and there's sun shining, and that makes your paint dry. Wet your brush and get some paint. Always mix it on the palette. Don't take it directly from the paint pot. The more water you add, the lighter your color. So I'm going to grab some more color, and since my paper is wet, I'm using the wet on wet paint technique. It's making my blue nice and smooth. Now if the paper dries too much, I can just get some more water and I can make that edge nice and soft and blending again. And the sky is always a little bit darker the further up you go. Now I want to let this paint dry before I paint anything else that's touching that area. So the next thing I want to do, since I'm not using a pencil to draw out any of this, I want to mix a color that I think is the lightest color in the painting I'm going to make. And I'm going to use that to sort of draw my outlines to map out everything I want to paint. So when I look at this house, I see a sort of very light yellowish tan color that is the trim color of the house. So I'm going to use that color as my outline. Now this yellow is really, really bright. I want to make that yellow less bright. So in order to do that, I use a complementary color. And some of you may have learned about complementary colors in school. And the complementary colors are red and green, orange and blue, and yellow and purple. So I have some yellow here. I'm going to take just a tiny touch of purple, and when I add that to my yellow, you can see it makes it less yellow. So that's how I can make my color less bright. Now I'm going to start by drawing out the shapes that I see in the house. Now this is simple. You look at the shapes that you see, triangles and rectangles, trapezoids, and that helps you map out where you're going to put your design. So I'm going to start with the gable roof in the center, triangle, and then there's another rectangle below that, and the trapezoid shape that makes the porch roof, and the other rectangle that's on the side. And every time my brush starts to get a little dry, I just add some more water and then I can get some more of my paint. This paint technique is called wet on dry. So my paint is wet and my paper is dry, and that makes a nice, easy to control line that I can outline my design. Now I'm going to draw the tower, and since this is so light, I can draw this right on top of the sky that I made. If I do make a mistake, I can easily cover what I've done. And I'm just mapping out all the design, and you're the artist here, so you can edit this however you like. This is your painting, and you get to make it look however you'd like. So this is replacing any sketch that I might have done with a pencil, and I'm just mapping it out with this light color of paint. Now, if you have any white in your painting, I want you to leave that part white using the white of the paper. You'll notice I don't have any white paint. I also don't have any black because I don't believe that there's any black to be seen in nature. That if you want a dark color, you can mix equal parts of those complementary colors I was talking about before, and you will get a nice dark color. This part is called a porte cochere. Any mistakes that I make, I can easily cover up with darker paint. And you can see by now, my sky has already dried. So now that I have mapped out the drawing of the painting that I would like to make, now I can go back in and start adding blocks of color. So the first color I want to add is the main color of the house, which is a light green. So I'm actually going to go back to this yellow that I started with, and I'm going to add some green to it. So now I'm going to mix the green that I want to use for the main parts of the house, which is kind of a light pale green, which I can make lighter with more water, but it's also got a little bit of yellow in it. So I'm going to grab some yellow, not too much yellow. And again, it's slightly brighter than I'd like it to be. So I'm going to grab just a touch of the complement to green, which is red. And that little bit of red is enough to make this color less bright. So now I'm going to go in like coloring and just block in my areas of color. And I'm doing all of this still with a very light wash. And then I go back and add my details later on. Whenever my brush gets too dry, just add a little bit more water. And when I'm doing the walls on the porch, I'm leaving my porch posts with that light yellow color that I was outlining with. And I'm going around my windows and always looking at what you're painting. Now I've made all of my light greens. Now I want to mix a slightly darker green. And again, I don't want it to be too bright, so I'm going to add some more red to that. If you add a lot of red, it's going to turn into gray. And now I can do my areas that have a medium green. This house actually has 3 shades of green. There's a light green on the body and a medium green in the gable. And I left out my gable bracket earlier, so I'm just leaving that area white. And I'm always moving around, working on different areas of my painting so that the paint has a chance to dry. So there I've done my medium colors of green, and now I have my darkest green. This is a darker green that's called forest green. So I'm gonna get more green and add some more red to that. I'm actually gonna take a touch blue. And if I want my color to be darker and I have too much water in it, I just touch it to my paper towel, let some of the water out, and now my paint will be darker. Now that's not quite dark enough, but I can go back and add another layer on top of this when it's dry. That's called glazing, when you have dry paint and then you add more paint on top of it. So now I'm painting in all my shutters. See, this is what you have to do, is keep observing. This is an outdoor painting. This is an impression of what I'm seeing. This is not an exact architectural drawing. And also my front doors are this dark green color. There's a dark green frame, and behind that green frame is this sort of reddish trim color that's in a few places on the house. So I'll go back and make that kind of rusty red color. And I'm always washing my brush in between changing colors. Now the next color that I have a lot of is my gray roof. So I'm going to mix a gray for that. And I'm going to start with some purple, which is super bright. That is not the color of my roof at all. So I'm going to add the complement to that color. Now I want equal parts of purple and yellow, and that's going to give me a really great gray that I can use to paint my roof. And so now I'm going to fill in my roof. You know, sometimes in watercolor, unexpected things happen. And sometimes those things are kind of interesting and fun. So you got to be open to those sort of happy accidents. This is a Victorian house, so it has a lot of interesting details to paint. Now I can use a variation on this color because I have all the centers of my windows, right, that are sort of a darker color. So I want to make it look like you can see the frames of the windows. So I'm going to paint around those frames. I want to make it a little bit more blue Now when I'm looking at the windows, when I look inside them, they're all kind of like a dark gray color. So it's up to you to pick what kind of color gray you want it to be. I'm going to add a little bit of my complement of blue, which is orange. So I'm using the tip of my brush now to paint all the centers of my windows. You're painting inside the windows. So you're painting the negative space. And as I'm working, most of the paint that I've done already has dried. Now I'm going to mix some of that red terracotta color. So I'm going to start with some red. I'm going to grab some orange. Now again, it's way too bright. So I'm going to add my complementary color again, which is blue or green since it's red and orange. So I'll grab a little blue. So I'm going to grab some more orange. I've come pretty close to that color that I wanted to use. Mixing colors is all about experimenting and observing. And in the end, it's your painting, so you can make the color whatever you want. It's a little too much water, so I'm taking out some of that water by touching it down to my paper towel. And now I can go back, right? And I had that red door. Once that dries, I can go back and add the windows in there. There's a little frame around this little window too. So those little touches really add some detail. Now the other place I see this color is underneath all the roofs. So I'm going to just give a little frame touch under those roofs. Now I just splashed a little bit there. So this is a good opportunity for me to show you. I splashed a little dot there. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water and wet that, blot it out. And that is called lifting. So if you've made a mistake, all you need to do is wet it and blot it with a paper towel, and you can lift that area up and correct something that you might have made a mistake. So I still have a few more places I'd like to add this red, and there's a little touch on some of my porch posts as well. Now, these are just little touches of color. This is more about an impression than the exact drawing. And on the brick columns that are holding up my porte cochere. And way off in the distance, I can see the stair railing. And I'm going to just use a little bit of that blue. Now that I've painted the house, I'd like to add some of the details of the nature, the trees and the plants around the house. So I'm going to start by making some tree trunk color. Most people would think you should just use some brown, but I would prefer to actually mix my own brown. So I'm going to start with some orange and use the complement of orange, which is blue, to make sort of a neutral gray brown that I'm going to use for my tree trunks. I've mixed my color and then I touch it gently to my paper towel to let out some of the water. And this is called more of a dry brush technique so that I'm able to make thin, detailed lines. And since my sky dried a long time ago, I don't have to worry about that blue moving. Now, even though it's spring, we don't have any leaves on the tree yet, so I'm just doing branches. Now down here, I just have the bottom of the tree trunk. I'm just sort of adding the suggestion because this is really far away. So I'm adding some of those tree trunks. And now I want to add, there's a big blooming flowering tree with some pink. And now I have a clean area that I can mix some pink. So I'm going to start with some red and add some water to that. Now I want this brush to be as dry as possible, so I am letting out as much water as I can, so I just have a little bit of color. And then I just want to add some texture, the impression of this flowering tree over here. So I want my brush to be as dry as I can, so that I'm getting the texture of that tree. I want to leave some white so that you see the white that's in between the pink. Now I can add some gray tree branches, and I want to get this paint to as nice a tip as I can to make that look like it's part of a flowering tree. And then I'll go back over here and add some more texture to my tree trunks that were in the distance. And now we're just about done. Painting outdoors is a great way to spend some time in nature, getting to know the architecture and plants all around you in your neighborhood. Have fun painting.